Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. I am Angie Holloway, the lawyer for doctors. In this short video, we're going to address the myth of DIY legal solutions for Georgia medical practices and talk about what the real value of an experienced healthcare lawyer does for your medical practice. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're going to talk about first DIY legal solutions and how they actually cost you more money than investing on the front end. Second, we're going to talk about the risks of DIY, how they give you outdated contracts, compliance violations, and also create poor patient relationships. And lastly, we're going to do a case in point how DIY failed a medical practice owner, a mental health practitioner. For those of you who have not yet watched my videos, hi, I am Angie Holloway. I am the lawyer for doctors, and we specialize in helping Georgia medical practices protect their licenses, their practices, and their peace with concierge legal support. I have been practicing law for 8 years. Prior to focusing on these different types of transactions, I litigated all over in Georgia state and federal courts and breach of contract, discrimination, eviction, all types of claims. And now I am completely dedicated to helping my clients avoid the chaos that comes with lawsuits. All right, so let's talk about the myth, right? So a lot of clients have this misconception. They're like, hey, I can't afford to invest in an experienced lawyer. I'm just going to DIY it. I'm going to get a template offline. I'm going to hire LegalZoom, which LegalZoom is a digital product. It is not legal advice, and the terms and conditions will tell you the same. But putting that aside, I really want to talk about why this is not the best decision for your practice and how this example of an actual client anonymized for confidentiality, of course, for this mental health practitioner. So just to kind of set the stage for some of these facts, they used a free operating agreement, which obviously operating agreements are basically that foundational contract that you use for your LLC, your limited liability company. Your operating agreement should cover everything. It's sort of like a prenup for your business. And so before you get into all the complexities that come with business ownership, the responsibilities, the liabilities, all of those things, the operating agreement gives you the opportunity to basically set forth, okay, what happens if we don't agree? Who's responsible for what? How do we kick people out? All different types of things, when you're going to be entitled to get distributions. All of those specificities are really important for you guys to talk about before you get into it, and a dispute happens, which is what ultimately happened for this particular client. So they used the free operating agreement template, which was very short. Most of the ones you'll find online, they're 5 to 10 pages. Maybe you'll find one for 12 pages, which is just not sufficient to cover all of the nuances that might take place in the context of a Georgia medical practice. So what happened, there was multiple members, the 3 members in this mental health practice, LLC. They created this entity. Things went awry. One of the members wanted to kick another one out. However, the actual agreement didn't have any type of mechanism for that to happen because each member was an equal owner of your membership and your voting interests, right? And so in an LLC, you have membership units or interests, and you use those in order to make decisions in the business. And so this free template basically gave them all equal 33 and a third percent. And so when they hit a stalemate, as far as being able to kick someone out of the actual entity, there was no way to do that, right? There was no deadlock provisions. And ultimately, it resulted in the business having to dissolve. So I'm going to show you guys, I love a good show and tell here. This is actually, I just Googled this just a few moments ago. I pulled up a free template, and you'll see I clicked on it, and you can kind of scroll through with me and see what this actual agreement provides, right? So make it a little bit bigger so you can see. This is a 7-page document, not unusual to what I've seen in these types of entity formations. And so essentially, you'll see as I scroll through here, it is just entirely insufficient to protect you in the event of a dispute. So I want to talk about some of the specific things here. So one of the first things you'll see here is officers, right? So a lot of times you will have a section where you designate the officers. This is one of the most heavily litigated areas, right? Because you don't know who's responsible for what, who's kind of usurped their authority, what happens if someone doesn't do something. And so those conversations really need to be had on the front end. Everyone can't be the COO or the CEO. It becomes very cumbersome for you to be able to manage that, right? Who's going to be the final decision-making authority on this particular issue? And so you'll see here, there are officers, but they have no responsibilities and there's no restrictions, right? So it says we'll have a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, and they will do as what is necessary in those particular roles. The problem with this is that you don't have any type of restriction, right? So normally in these types of scenarios, what I would recommend is actually a defined list of duties, like you would in an employment agreement, a well-drafted one, where you're going to actually write out, okay, if you are in this role, this is what you're responsible for. You're responsible for overseeing the records. You're responsible for creating a monthly report. You're responsible for publishing it to this secured platform. You're responsible for responding to requests for information. Whatever those particular nuances are, to make sure that there's no confusion. Because otherwise, then you get into some kind of issue, the records aren't being produced and there's no specificity, then now you don't have a basis to probably either you might want to kick someone out of the organization if it's gotten to such a degree, or to hold them accountable, right? And so it's too many cooks in the kitchen, as my grandmother used to say. And so that's something that you want to think about. You don't want to be in a situation where when you're in a high conflict uh, enterprise, right? Somebody can't agree, someone's done something the other person doesn't like, someone has stolen money from the entity. There's all of these things that can happen. You need to have provisions in place to protect you, right? So you don't have to end up going to court, right? So that's exactly what happens, right? If you have one of these little 5, 6, 7 page documents, you don't have a basis for you guys to resolve deadlocks or conflicts, you end up having to go to court to get this resolved, right? Because there is no means in the operating agreement for you to resolve that, right? Another issue with this particular free operating template is that there is a mediation clause, right? Which is great. It sounds great in concept, but the mediation clause says the the actual mediation and how it will proceed, the method, the term will be determined by the members in dispute. So, just from a practical perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense for people who are in high conflict. Again, this is a point where somebody wants another person out of the organization, out of the business. Now you're going to rely on each other to be able to figure out who's going to be the mediator. Where are you going to mediate it? How long is the mediation going to take? What are the rules of mediation, right? How long do you have to participate before you go into arbitration, right? And so there's all of these nuances that are not covered here. And so the nuances is where you have risk, and that's where you have issues. Another thing, you have indemnification, right? So this is a pretty standard provision for you to have indemnification for the members of the entity, right? That's one of the main reasons why you create a separate business entity, is so you have that limitation of liability. However, with this free template that you have here, there is no bad faith provision. A bad faith provision basically means that if you have a member who is intentionally violating the operating agreement, or, for example, committing crimes, committing fraud, all different types of certain limitations, then they're not going to be indemnified. Why would the company pay for one of its members if they are actually abusing the authority that they were given by the organization, right? So there are no parameters here. So this, in this situation, based off what we've described here, someone committing fraud or embezzling funds, the company is going to fit the bill to, once the company is sued or whatever happens with that, the company is going to pay for that person, right? If they're going to be sued in order to protect them, as it's stated here in this operating agreement. And of course, when you say that out loud, it sounds a little bananas, right? But that is the kind of lack of nuance that you see in these agreements, right? You don't have protections that you need such that the worst case scenario is going to happen. All right, so let's see what really happened in this scenario with this particular client, right? So, what really happened is they ended up having to file a dissolution lawsuit, right? Right, and that cost them $80,000 in attorney's fees before they were able to reach a settlement agreement, right? And then while this case was pending, they lost over $250,000 in business revenue, right? Because of the litigation and all of the different complexities that went along with that and managing the books. They weren't able to continue business operations at that time, right? And so the real costs, you add these together in addition to the mental and emotional distress of litigating, because it is not as seen on TV. They ended up losing $330,000 for a free template, right? And so when you think about it in terms of what actually happens, this is not something that I ever recommend to my clients. Now, of course, there are other situations where, I mean, if you're a single member LLC, or you're going to create a single member corporate entity, maybe you don't need to invest in that. Maybe that's not your highest priority risk, right? Because even if you're a single member LLC, even if the operating agreement is not well written, it's only you, right? So your risk is relatively low as compared to someone who's doing business with multiple people, right? And so we always want to think about, okay, what is the risk profile for the particular business that you're in? And so in this situation, having, a person who's having two partners, a three entity multi-member LLC, you need legal counsel, because otherwise you end up in a situation like this where you're ending up paying a lot more than it would cost you to invest in a well-drafted operating agreement, right? All right, so all of this is to say, what do I do and how do I help Georgia medical practice owners? We create a custom strategy to help you manage your top risks. We help you to avoid this DIY legal chaos scenario that we just talked about. If you are considering starting a practice, or you're already having a Georgia medical practice and you're wondering whether or not you have these huge risks from these DIY templates that you may have downloaded, and there is no judgment, but I would really encourage you to consider consulting with an experienced Georgia healthcare lawyer to help you evaluate your risks. Partner with me and my team. We'll figure out what your biggest risks are, and we'll tell you, like, okay, what is your number one priority? I'll tell you, hey, this aspect can wait a little bit. We can work on that on Q2, but this one we need to address within the next 30 days. And we can have that candid conversation to discuss any other questions that you may have. Go ahead and book a call via the link below to get started. Thanks so much.